Gorgeous and fluid, 1988's Ninja Gaiden for the NES revolutionized video game narrative by paying tribute to film classics while sporting best in-class action design. This is the Annotated Ninja Gaiden. Welcome to the Annotated Ninja Gaiden. Not so different from books and film, important works of the video game medium deserve concentrated study. For this series, we'll go act by act to break down its design and uncover as much of the game as it can show us, while also discussing its development, inspirations, and ultimate legacy. As a matter of table setting, it should be noted that Ninja Gaiden, like many other games of its era, is saddled with a time limit. In this case, 150 seconds per stage, including boss fights. As such, we'll need to circle back to concepts and information from episode to episode as to not break the deliberate flow of the game. While I will occasionally stop or take my time through stages and boss battles, this is not a game designed to be taken at a languid pace. Developed and released in 1988 for the Famicom in Japan and then the next year in the United States, this game was forged in tandem with a belt-scrolling arcade game of the same name, also released in 1988, by Japanese software publisher Tecmo. This sibling game and their synchronous development will come up often through this video series, as well as ports of the game to different platforms and outlier spin-off games bearing the same name. What's happening on screen now is one of the most famous and enduring aspects of the game, the cutscenes that drive the plot. Past this initial cinematic that outlines the motivation of our protagonist Ryu Hayabusa, these are essentially rewards for the player for completing each act of the game, with smaller scenes interspersed before major boss battles for effect. The dramatic duel that opens this game is an effective showpiece that both sets and breaks the rules of most of these cinematics going forward. For the most part, cutscenes use a letterbox format to truncate the action on screen and leave room for any dialogue that we'll see underneath. Full-screen images, then, are particularly rare in this game, punctuating important moments with flash and flare. In terms of this game as an NES product, this opening scene takes place before the player presses start on the controller, and could theoretically be missed since it runs a few seconds after the perfunctory title screen. Future games in this series rectify this, though, by playing the opening cinematic before the title screen is shown. Like development, this will be a topic discussed in greater detail in future episodes of this series. On to the actual game then. The title card screens for each of the acts have names for them in both the Famicom version of the game as well as the PC Engine port, which was rebuilt from scratch by developer Hudson Soft and released in Japan in 1992. These were edited out of the US release of the game, but the names are still found in the NES manual, with Act 1 titled Destiny. These screens are referred to as an eye catch, which is also the name of the musical sting that we heard, and a reference to short screens in anime that pop up before commercials. During a roundtable interview for the release of Ninja Gaiden's definitive soundtrack vinyl by Brave Wave Productions, game director Hideo Yoshizawa says that these were put in specifically to change up the game-like stages and improve the story's tempo. The manual also has location names for the individual stages of each act, with this one taking place in the vaguely named Galesburg. While there are towns bearing this name in the United States, perhaps the largest of them is the Galesburg 45 minutes northwest of Peoria in Illinois. Since Ryu's only directive from his presumed killed father was to travel to the US to find Walter Smith, any Galesburg in this case will do. Ninja Gaiden is, in its essence, a platform action game. From the user interface to the placement of various items to the sub-weapons that Ryu can collect, though, longtime NES fans will notice striking similarities to the first Castlevania game, released by Konami in 1987. Over the years, interviewers have tried asking the developers what the inspiration was for the larger design of this game, perhaps attempting to finally confirm the vampire hunting classic was indeed Ninja Gaiden's spiritual father. However, the closest that any of the main developers have ever said on the subject was an interview with Masato Kato on Hardcore Gaming 101. He said there weren't any specific direct influences, but he was playing a lot of Rockman at the time, known to us in the West as Mega Man. You'll notice items are dropped by attacking street lamps, but this changes in every level to a different sort of hanging object. This was updated in Ninja Gaiden 2 to be a uniform floating orb in every stage, and again in Ninja Gaiden 3 to preview what's contained within. This initial level will grant the player nearly every item found in the game save 2, which we'll see in future episodes. Interestingly, the placement of these power-ups can be slightly different in the Famicom version of the game, but only by a few pixels of height here and there. The PC Engine version also slightly changes these placements, as well as completely changing what's inside in certain situations, which dramatically alters the game compared to the NES original. What we harvest from them are found on the right. First, two different kinds of what the US manual calls spiritual strength and the Japanese manual simply calls ninja power. This is ammunition for Ryu's various sub-weapons, the blue being worth 5 points and the red being 10, capping at 99 if the player is stingy in their use. This was suggested for future games to have a cap that the player can ultimately upgrade over the course of the game for some persistence, and the red power-up used to immediately fill that cap. The sprite used for this power-up has a kanji that translates into shinobi, which is a word used basically interchangeably with ninja. We also find 2 pots for point bonuses, a blue for 500 and a red for 1000. Sub-weapons will be covered in the next episode. And here we are in Jay's Bar, which is the setting for our first scrap with one of the game's level bosses. The manual for the game offers quite a bit of expository information on these enemies not found in the game itself. This, the Barbarian, is called the first of a loose fraternity of enemies named the Malice Four. According to the manual, he hails from the deep forests of Brazil and is known as the Executioner of South America, which foreshadows future adventures for Ryu. As a boss, though, he's only a minor threat with his slow movement speed and curiously ineffective weapon swing, which was altered per the PC Engine release to be much more deadly. Worse for him, though, is that he can be easily avoided by taking advantage of one of the game's other notable features, the ability to cling to walls. As you've already seen up to this point, Galesburg gives the player a somewhat stress-free opportunity to come to terms with the fact that Ryu will be confronted with traversal obstacles that must be overcome by climbing, in this case by springing between 2 objects on a sort of triangle jump fashion. However, the first Ninja Gaiden game kept Ryu static on the wall unless attached to a ladder, but this doesn't stop the player from deftly moving the control pad back and forth while hitting the jump button, giving the player the ability to scale a single wall with some practice. What we'll find down the road is that this will come with unintended though very advantageous effects. While there are absolutely better, faster, and downright cruel ways to defeat this boss, armed with this wall jump we can make the Barbarian look as inept as any masked executioner ever could. And that brings us to the end of this first episode. Join us next time as we meet new cast members, a brief plot twist, and further discuss the game in terms of its arcade counterpart. See you then.